I'm Emily.
I'm Greta.
This is our keyword video on visibility and discourse.
We've asked people to share their experiences with discourse surrounding gender and sexuality in the classroom and workplace.
I had an interesting conversation with my freshman advisor once. I just remember the comment that he made, which was, I'm fine with the whole gay thing, but I don't get this whole, transgender thing. Why would someone want to switch genders? So that was a professor who I decided to not come out to anytime soon.
I worked in a lab the summer after my sophomore year. I'm an undergrad, and one day one of the grad students just decided to expound on his views, and the main portion of his view was that being gay was against the laws of nature. Just a direct quote. All of the other grad students and who could have stepped in and done something were watching but not saying anything. My grad student boss was there and he could have said something, but he didn't say anything, so it was super weird. And I just argued with this guy for a while, and then I left and I sat on the steps up to 77 and cried for a while, and it was sad.
So this one time I was taking a writing class here at MIT, and the professor was impressively heteronormative and cisnormative. So it was a class where we were supposed to spend the semester writing our own stories and workshopping them with the other students and with the professor. So my prompt was android, and I decided to write about a transgender android and to have my other main character be a human who identifies as agender, and so use the gender-neutral pronoun they. I didn't think this would be a big problem, but apparently it was a terrible problem for the professor and for a lot of the other students, and got more criticism than any other part of my story put together, which was unfortunate because it was not the content of my story. When it got to the final draft, I turned it in, 30 pages of a character with they pronouns, and the professor, he was just like, no, you can't turn in the final draft with these pronouns. And so we had a meeting about why, and he said it was because it just wasn't readable with those pronouns, and he said that shorter versions had been okay because he could sort of stomach it, but that in the long version he couldn't deal with the they pronouns for that long, and it wasn't readable, and if my story wasn't readable he couldn't grade it properly, and so it was going to lose points because he couldn't read it. And I tried to explain to him that it was a valid pronoun and that there is no reason it should be unreadable. Then on top of that, he insisted not that I pick a different pronoun, but he told me which pronoun I should pick because he was like, this character is obviously male, actually, and so you should just switch it to he pronouns and not do any of this gender-neutral nonsense. Redeeming factor was that I kept the original version of the draft with the they pronouns and turned it into the WGS program here and got an award for it, so WGS program at least is not cisnormative.
These examples demonstrate the importance of stepping in when people are being intolerant. Those that don't are assumed to be in agreement, making it the job of the marginalized person to stand up for themselves, at the risk of their opinion being considered invalid because they identify that way. Allowing people with intolerant views to control the discourse affects the environment itself, making it an unsafe space.
In high school, I worked in a wood shop for several years, and our boss, he loved to speculate about the romantic lives of his employees, particularly if a male and a female employees were friends. He greatly enjoyed speculating about their prospective romantic interactions. So for a while, both me and my best friend worked at this shop, and so for years he would make comments about us. Of course, I was out to my friend as liking girls, not guys, so the whole thing was rather awkward.
So last summer I had an internship in the tech industry doing software, and I was working at this place where they didn't have any female software developers, which obviously sucked. The other intern was female, and so when we both got there on the first day, everybody's talking about how excited that they are that they finally have female software engineers. And yes, I'm excited that there is a female software engineer too, but I'm not a female software engineer. But I didn't feel comfortable saying that. For one, I think having more female software engineers is super important, and I almost feel like to deny that I was female was to take away from that. further, just everybody was so constantly reinforcing it and like calling us ladies. And at one point they actually said that our managers were being less hard on us than they would have been if we were guys, which I was like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. So it was just a very uncomfortable experience overall. And this was during the summer where I was kind of figuring out my own identity. And at the end of the summer, I felt confident enough to write the bio for a blog post that I had done using gender-neutral pronouns to describe myself. So I sent it to my manager, and she sent me back, said that she had corrected some typos and for me to look at it, and she had turned the pronoun they into she. So I sent her an email back like, that wasn't a mistake, this is the pronoun I prefer. And, she apologized, and she's actually a queer woman, but she just thought that I had messed up. It didn't occur to her that that was my identity. So people just assume constantly that everybody is binary and fits into these buckets when it's not always true, and it makes people be self-silencing because it's really hard to speak up against that when everybody just doesn't even occur to them that you could be different.
Stories revolve around cases where individuals violated expectations of their gender and sexuality in the workplace. In both cases, they were expected to conform to the established narrative, and this erased their identities. Similarly, in his article, Mutilating Gender, Dean Spade questions the discourse surrounding transgender people that has been set up by medical professionals. He points out that doctors propagate a narrative about transgender identity that does not conform to many people's lived experiences, thereby rendering them invisible in the way described by the two previous stories.
One thing that happens a lot in linguistics classes is just the material that's in the classes is really gender binary. All the example sentences are really stereotyped, so it's always like, John did this, John did that, and if you need a second person, you have Mary, and Mary's always the person who gets stuff done to her as opposed to getting to do anything herself, so it's always like, John kissed Mary, or things like that, and they've like done statistical analysis that John is always the active participant, Mary's always the passive participant, and everything is really heteronormative. It's never John kissed Bill or anything like that.
In a lot of the introduction to discrete math classes, we learned about something called the stable matching algorithm, also called the stable marriage algorithm. And the idea behind it is that you have basically a bipartite set, so two groups of nodes, and there's no edges between one group and the other group. And the way they always represent this is you have a bunch of girls and you have a bunch of guys, and they're all trying to match up in a one-to-one correspondence, and it's how you find a stable matching. So I first learned about this in 604.2, and they went through it, and then they were talking about the kind of graphs you can do this on, and they're like, you can't do it if you have gay relationships, because then they're no longer bipartite and it doesn't work. It's really interesting how it just kind of carries this theme, like, yeah, we know it's only for straight people, and we kind of know that that's bad, but we're going to do it anyway because it makes our lives easier, and I've been feeling that a lot from a lot of places in MIT.
As Emily Martin wrote in The Egg and the Sperm, scientific material is often influenced by opinions and belief. When scientific material is taught as fact, intolerant ideas that have made their way into the material will also be considered equally factual. Many people are aware of this, but choose not to change the material in order to simplify their lives. It is possible and often easy to make these changes, but people must be willing to put in the initial effort.
In a class that I'm taking right now called 6170, we just proposed our final projects for a web application. And one of the groups was proposing a dating app. And the idea is that you have a bunch of guys and you have a bunch of girls, and they can act as wingmen for their friends and set each other up. So after the presentation, I raised my hand. I said, all of your examples were super heterosexual. Does this app support anything else? And they did say that it could, in theory, have gay couples in it, but they didn't say anything about non-monosexual people, and they didn't say anything about genderqueer people. So a little later, I also brought up the issue of non-binary identities, which they said, we'll do that in version 2.0, which is like saying that like my identity is not important enough for you to put in the first version of your app, which I was kind of pissed about. But the professor was actually on my side, which was awesome. He was arguing with them about how they could support that and how it wouldn't be that hard. And after the class, a few people came up to me and thanked me for saying that, which was like super cool. Yay, I'm not the only queer person here. And I saw later that on Piazza they had posted a question about their design to try to get help, and in italics at the bottom they said, please don't bring up issues of gender neutrality, we're going to work on that later. So they said it again. And I was thinking, like, I could totally start a Piazza flame war over this, but the same professor responded and said, I know you asked us not to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, like, this is not okay. So it was really great that the professor got involved. I mean, he's like a cis straight man, but he still cares. And that was really empowering to see him educating people.
The last video demonstrates how helpful an ally in a position of power can be. Though discourse is often used as a way to silence minority groups, it can also be used to bring them visibility and validity.